How many of you have been in a city and have seen someone on the street asking people for money or holding up a sign that says that they were homeless? A lot. How many of you wondered what that felt like and what that person's story was? Or maybe you just didn't even know what to think. I know I certainly did, right? One night, before my senior year of college, I had seen a lot of that. And one night, a friend and I were having a conversation, and we happened to land on the topic of homelessness. We had so many questions about it, but the discussion really didn't seem to go anywhere. And then we began wondering, well, what if someone were to voluntarily live homeless? Not for a night, not for a week, but longer. Immersing oneself into the culture and the community would be the best way to learn. I decided that after I graduated the following summer, I would be homeless. Well, I only have two slides, so you're going to see a lot of that. But on August 6, 2011, I took a metro train down to Chicago, Ogilvy Transportation Center, with just a backpack full of clothes and a few other items. My goal was to gain an understanding of what it meant to be homeless in Chicago. I grew my hair out a little bit, and then I stopped shaving 2 weeks before becoming homeless. I thought I had to look a certain way, and this is me the day after Thanksgiving in 2011. Quite a bit different. And like I said, I only have two slides, so you're going to see that a lot. The first month, I ate at soup kitchens. I slept in parks, bushes, and when it was forecasted to rain, I would sneak into buildings like churches and schools. And the decisions I had to make, they weren't like the ones I was used to. It wasn't, what class do I need to enroll in to fill this credit requirement, or what am I going to do Saturday night? They were along the lines of, what do I need to do to get through this day? What do I need to do to get through this night? Every decision was vital. I had to consciously think, what am I going to do for breakfast this morning? Or what am I going to do about going to the bathroom? Where am I going to sleep? What do I do if it rains? Every decision was vital, and a lot of times they had to be made split second. So like one night, it started downpouring, and the forecast was wrong, so you can imagine how upset I was. And I was in an outdoor stairwell at the bottom, and rain was gushing down the steps, and wind just blasted my face, and I just had to think like what I would do. So I dug into my backpack, I got a few plastic bags, laid them on the ground, took my umbrella, opened it, set it down, and it shielded me from the rain and the wind, and it worked. So a lot of times, sleep was pretty rough. It would be off and on, an hour wake up, half hour wake up. And then usually if I was sleeping outside around 3 in the morning, I would just wake up shivering uncontrollably because the temperatures would drop during the night. And by that time, I would have to just get up and just walk around just to get the blood flowing a little bit. But I knew that I wouldn't get much rest, so I would just hop on a CTA bus and just ride it back and forth till dawn. But in order to learn more about homelessness, I knew that I had to stay in an overnight shelter and interact with more people. I joined a program called Cornerstone, located underneath the Wilson Red Line L stop on the north side of the city of Chicago. They didn't have overnight housing for single men, so they had contracts with 2 different overnight shelters. One of them was a place called Walls. It was on the west side in the neighborhood of East Garfield Park. That's the place that I went to every day for 2 months. And shelters differed from one another, especially in regards to resources. Walls was the bare minimum, a meal and a mat. That's really it. It had a bit of a reputation too. It was on the west side, and there were some rough guys that stayed there. But everyone in the shelter was unique. Everybody had different life experiences that shaped their perspectives. And we acknowledged differences of race, religion, education, resources. And during that time, I had more conversations about those topics than I ever had in my entire life. But what was most important was your character, how you treated others. And if I show you respect, you're going to show me respect. That's how it was. I grew close with a handful of people. I think a lot of times we used each other to get through the situation of being homeless. You know, we would chat, we would tease each other, help one another, you know, things that friends do. One of my friends, his name was Clyde. And Clyde is one of the most fascinating people that I've ever met. He was about 5'10". He had a shaved head, which he usually covered with a purple bandana. And he was chiseled. If you looked at him, you knew that you would not want to mess with this guy. But he walked around with this burden in his step and in the tone of his voice. He just seemed completely exhausted by life. He never smiled, never. He was a lone ranger. He'd been in prison for 26 years. Our backgrounds couldn't be further apart, yet I was one of his closest friends. We ate meals together. We sat by each other in a space called the day room. And we were close enough where he felt comfortable one night to ask me if he could use my toothbrush. And I said, I mean, I've used it. It's pretty gross. That's okay. Well, you know, I was planning to get a new one tomorrow anyway, so you can keep it. And the only thing that mattered was our interaction. I decided to accept him for the person that he was, and he appreciated that. He'd often surprise me, too. Like one time, we were eating lunch together with another friend of ours named Lee. And Clyde's just rattling off all this information about constitutional law and individual rights. And Lee and I looked at each other and were like, what? He's like, yeah, if I apply myself, I can be really smart. And he was one of the most genuine and hardworking people I've ever met. He'd often leave the shelter at 2 a.m. to go scrap for metal. And I remember one morning, I was sitting in the Cornerstone cafeteria eating breakfast by myself at a table. And he was in line. And he said to me, Rick, how you doing? I said, I'm all right, you know. No. How are you really doing? Man, it took me aback. Rarely does anybody cut through that superficial small talk. But he meant it, and he cared. Two of the greatest moments of my life are making Clyde laugh. It's the only two times I've ever actually, I think, seen him smile or laugh. One night we were at the shelter, and we were at walls waiting for the mats to be dragged out and placed, you know, right next to each other. And I'm standing right here, Clyde's right here, and then another guy is about 10 feet away from us, and he's bleeding on his leg. So Clyde confronts him and tells the manager, who wasn't the normal manager that ran walls, and he said, you know, you're bleeding on your leg. And so it erupted into this enormous scene involving everyone at the shelter. He should have gotten medical attention, yet he just wiped it off with a paper towel and slept on a mat just like the rest of us. And everybody knew that those mats really didn't get cleaned. So it got heated. People shouted out different diseases and illnesses, HIV, TB. And at one point, someone, instead of saying shingles, said jingles. So I joked to Clyde to ease the tension a little bit, and he was as serious as ever. I got the stupid game show host voice that I sometimes do, and I go, look out, he's got the jingles. And Clyde starts cracking up. He's just laughing. He's literally bent over slapping his knee. And for as terrible as that night was, that moment just made me so happy that I made Clyde laugh. After about 2 months homeless, I felt that I had reached my goal. And the reason was because I stopped learning new things. New guys would come up to me in the shelter, asking me questions about being homeless in the process, and I could answer them for them. I decided to continue, though. And as a result, my homeless experience became less about me observing others, listening to their stories, and more about the psychological changes that I endured. Unlike the first month homeless, where every decision I made was just crucial to surviving the night, in the shelter, every decision was made for me, predetermined. What time I got up, what I ate, what time I had to be back at the shelter, what time I showered, what time I went to bed. And this lack of power to make decisions made me feel trapped. And it was more exhausting than actually making my own decisions. As a result, time passed so slow that a day felt like a week, a week felt like a month, and a month felt like a year. Each day was just so redundant. Once I left the shelter and the friends that I met, I became more lonely than ever. And when I finally returned home, I struggled with that transition. After a while, eventually, I sat down and I reflected on the topic of homelessness. But I would think about my homeless experience, and it would just lead me way over here, and then just way over here. And it was like this huge puzzle that it just didn't fit all together. And then I did one thing. I looked up the definition of homeless. It sounds like such a no-brainer step to take, but after thinking about being homeless, and then actually being homeless, I never looked it up. How many of you have looked up the definition of homeless before today? No one. This is the actual definition of homeless. A lack of permanent housing. That's it. A lack of permanent housing. Most people don't look it up because when we hear the word homeless, we already feel we know what it is. Society already has a definition. It consists of negative attributes and conjures up an image of someone who's sad, dirty, unintelligent, begging on the streets of our cities. That's not what it is. Homeless doesn't belong in a box with a checklist of criteria where you have to look a certain way, you have to have an education level like this, your background must be like this. Anyone can become homeless. A 5-year-old because her mother is fleeing from domestic violence. A teenager who's escaping gang activity. A teenager who came out to their parents but was rejected. A middle-aged man who lost his job. A veteran battling mental illness. Or even a foreigner coming to our country to seek a better life opportunity. The one true thing that all these examples have in common would be a lack of permanent housing. Otherwise, just like everybody in this room, each person has a different personality and story. Homelessness is all around us, and it's a very prevalent issue within our society. But we cannot fight it if we do not understand it. By actively deciding to better understand it and to consciously recognize our own biases, we can redefine homeless. So the next time you see that person holding up a sign, view them not as someone whose characteristics fit inside a box, but as the unique human being that they are. Thank you for having me.